Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about the first year of the Korean War. So the essential question is what happened in Korea in 1950? All right. So first, we can see that Korea is divided at the 38th parallel after World War II. So during World War II, Korea is occupied by Japan. Japan loses World War II to the Allies. And so the Soviets are going to occupy North Korea and the Americans are going to occupy South Korea. And it wasn't supposed to be permanent. This was just a temporary split. But as the Cold War hardens, these barriers become permanent. And so we're going to see a split at the 38th parallel. And then we're going to see the North invade the South in June 25th, 1950. All right, it's just 1950. All right, so first thing first. So you're the United States. You feel a need to help South Korea, right? Because we have this whole containment strategy that is now in place. And we have to show that there's credibility. Credibility meaning that you're actually going to do what you said you're going to do. So what's the first thing you're going to do? Is you're going to go and try to find some allies. You're going to try to get a coalition together to help you. And the United States is unbelievably lucky because the Soviet Union at the time is boycotting the UN. So the Soviet Union is part of the Security Council. If they were there, they could have vetoed any UN decision, but they're boycotting because the Chinese seat in the UN was given to Taiwan instead of mainland China. And since now mainland China is communist, the Soviet Union is trying to help them. But of course, they're not there to veto this. So what does the United States do? They get the UN to pass a resolution declaring that North Korea is the aggressor and that the UN should work to stop this aggression. All right. So right away, President Truman, who's president in 1950, sends U.S. air and naval forces to help South Korea. Originally, at first, they're not sending troops. All right. Very importantly, the U.S. doesn't declare war. In fact, the last war that the United States declared was World War II. All right. So instead, Congress is going to authorize all of the military actions, but there's no war that's actually going to be declared. All right. Instead, we're going to call it a police action. All right. And who is going to be put in charge? A general named Douglas MacArthur. He's going to be very important during this war. All right. So what's the significance of the U.S. entry into the war? So the first one, if we think about Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chairman General Omar Bradley, Americans at the top level don't think the Soviet Union and China are going to get into the war, but if they do, it could be World War III. So in the back of your head, what I want you to think about, a lot of the things that happened during the Cold War is there's sort of a low probability but extremely high importance event if the Soviets or the Chinese get involved into a conflict. World War III would be very, very bad. All right. When Truman sends tens of thousands of American troops to Korea, to Asia, he is expanding and militarizing American foreign policy. That is what one historian, James Patterson, would say, right? So containment can mean a lot of things. It could mean ideological containment. It could mean economic aid to friendly countries. But what you're seeing here is the military aspect of containment, and you're seeing American foreign policy tilting in a militaristic direction. All right. And overarchingly, what's going to be very important is Truman wants a limited defensive war in South Korea. He's very worried about this war expanding into World War III, which is what he absolutely doesn't want. Versus Douglas MacArthur's view, who's going to say, no, we are militarily strong. We're going to need to push our advantage. We should roll back communism. And if it leads to World War III, it's not the end of the day. It's not the end of the world because we have more nukes than everyone else. So it's a bit more of an aggressive, blasé attitude about World War III. All right, so early fighting. So unfortunately, the South Korean leader, Syngman Rhee, was very aggressive, and he said, I want tanks, I want all the ammunition and all the guns you can give me, and he was talking about reunification. This was the South Korean dictator or leader. And so Americans really didn't want to give him too many weapons because we were worried how he would use them. That meant that as the North Koreans invaded the South with Soviet tanks and Soviet ammunition and guns, the South was completely unprepared, right? They were totally outgunned. And as we're going to see, like the very beginning of the war, the North is crushing the South militarily, right? And so basically they get pushed all the way back down here, this tiny little piece in the South called Busan, right? That's where the last of the South Korean troops are. And so what does Douglas MacArthur do, who's in Japan? He goes behind enemy lines, and he does an amphibious assault at Incheon, which is over here. And what he does is he cuts off the enemy supply lines and causes complete havoc, right? They didn't see this coming. And all of a sudden, they are in complete retreat, right? So the North Koreans totally caught off guard, and they are going as far north as they possibly can. They are running away, all right? So this was a huge gamble, and it totally changes the entire war, the entire conflict, all right? But let's go back and think about how this war began. So the way this war began was the United States was there to help South Korea and to basically return Korea to the status quo before the war, which meant the 38th parallel. So all they had to do was kick North Korea out of the South, and from the war aims that the United States set out at the beginning of the war, they would win. But something very interesting happens after Incheon. So it's so successful that the North Koreans are just going as far north as possible, and the Americans are following them. And they are following them past the 38th parallel. And they are going further and further north. So here, right, they're going further and further north, and you'll see a river, right? Right between Korea and China. It's called the Yalu River. And so a lot of the American thinkers are like, oh, we're winning. Let's reunify the peninsula under South Korea, right? So what we're going to have is a stronger, more powerful ally, and it'll be great. And they're going to be right up against what is now a communist China. This is going to be great for the United States. This is going to be even better than returning to the 30th parallel. But if you get into the heads of the Chinese, who just became communists, they don't want an American ally right on their border, and they are very they're hinting this to the Americans. They're saying, "Hey guys, like great, you won, but can you guys not be right on our border, because for national security reasons, we cannot allow an American ally to be right on our border." And the Americans completely disregard. They're like, oh, the Chinese are weak. What are they going to do about it? And really, what you see are the Americans getting very arrogant and losing sight of their original war aims, which was the 38th parallel and showing credibility for containment, right? That was really what they were trying to do, all right? And so what happens? Well, I mean, shouldn't be too surprised to hear that the Chinese attack, right? They stealthily put troops into North Korea, and 150,000 Chinese attack. And the UN supply lines are stretched extraordinarily thin, right? Because they've moved north so rapidly that the Americans and the UN forces just are not able to deal with the Chinese that come out of nowhere. And so the UN forces, the American forces, they suffer huge losses and get pushed really far south, right? And the Chinese are taking a tremendous amount of losses as well, right? So lots and lots. It becomes a much bloodier war after the Chinese get involved. All right. So just keep that in mind. Keep all of this in mind. All right. So just to recap, The Korean War starts because the North Koreans want to reunify the peninsula, want Korea to be one country, a communist country, all right? Originally, early gains for the North because the South is unprepared, including the Americans were unprepared for this eventuality. They get pushed all the way south to Busan. Then at Incheon, Douglas MacArthur counterattacks, cuts their supply lines. They push all the way north, way past the 30th parallel, up to the Yalu River. Once they get up to the Yalu River, the Chinese are going to get into the war, push the UN forces and the Americans all the way back. And this is really where we are at the end of the first year of the Korean War.